give it a few seconds. So hello everybody. We're gonna give this a few seconds before we start. Allow people to join. Let's see, I've muted everyone, so if you're going to speak, you have to unmute yourself later. Okay. So, welcome everybody. I'm going to do a quick introduction. So, welcome to today's webinar on the methodology M-ICR010, Coal Abatement for the Energy Transition. Thank you for joining. My name is Bjorn, and I will be moderating today's session on behalf of the International Carbon Registry, or ICR. The purpose of this webinar is to present the proposed methodology, explain its key design elements, and provide an opportunity for stakeholders to ask questions during the public consultation period. Please note that hosting this webinar does not imply approval or endorsement of the methodology by ICR. The methodology is currently under public consultation, and any decision on approval will be taken following the completion of the consultation and ICR's formal review process according to the approval process. The public consultation for M-ICR010 is open until the close of business on the 29th of January. Stakeholders are encouraged to submit formal written comments through the consultation process, in addition to questions raised today. Participants are invited to submit questions using the Q&A function throughout the webinar. And you can create questions in the bottom right corner and select the Q&A feature. We will address as many questions as possible during the Q&A session at the end. If time does not allow, unanswered questions may be addressed through the public consultation response process. During the Q&A session, the presenters will be joined by experts from TransEnergy Global and Brundtland. Please note that responses provided today are for clarification purposes only. Formal considerations of comments will occur through the structured public consultation and review process. Also, this webinar is being recorded, and the recording and presentation materials will be made available after the session. We will try to keep scheduled time and conclude the session promptly. As you can see here, we're going to run quickly through the agenda. Gumi, he is going to run through ICR's methodology approval process. Then we will go through the methodology overview and finally the Q&A session. Now, a quick background on the presenters. Guðmundur Sigbergsson is the CEO of ICR. He brings extensive experience in standardization, conformity assessment, and climate governance, with a background spanning certification, financial regulation, and international carbon markets. Guðmundur leads the development of the ICR program as an ISO-aligned greenhouse gas program with a strong focus on environmental integrity, methodological rigor, and scaling credible climate finance solutions. Duncan Ward is the co-founder and managing director of TransEnergy Global, or TEG, a company pioneering the coal to clean energy transition through high-integrity carbon credits. He brings over 25 years of experience in entrepreneurship, international development, and corporate, and leads TEG's mission. Dumu Shesi has a strong foundation in finance and consulting across South Africa's carbon and climate policy landscape. She holds a Bachelor of Business Science in Finance and Accounting and a postgraduate diploma in accounting from the University of Cape Town. She has contributed to the development and registration of several carbon credit projects, including the development of the ICR methodology, Coal Abatement for the Energy Transition. So, Gumi, are you ready?
Yeah, I hope so. Thank you for this introduction, Bjorn, and happy to be here today. I will be running through the ICR methodology approvals process like we usually do during these public consultation webinars on methodology approvals. A little bit about ICR. Many of you are familiar, of course, with ICR, but ICR is a greenhouse gas program heavily relying on ISO standards and the ISO conformity assessment approach. Under the ICR, we are now with over 200 projects somewhere in the registration or the project, 10 methodology in the methodology approval process, either disclosed or not disclosed yet. Then we are working with over 25 VVBs at the moment, with over 130 developers and multiple sales channels of the credits that are issued. So a little bit of background on the ICR program requirements. This comprises, and this is important for the methodology approach. So criteria for registration of any project in the ICR program is are ISO 40064-2, which brings the benchmark of carbon project development, such as how project needs to be described, the greenhouse gas sources, reservoirs, comprising the boundary, baseline scenario, quantification monitoring, etc. But such it's not a carbon market standard, but it's a rigor requirement set of elements that need to be included with full carbon projects. What we do in the program requirements, we complement the ISO 40064-2 with the ICR requirement documents that addresses the missing carbon market elements from the ISO standard. This relate, for example, on eligibility, safeguards and SDGs, additionality, permanence, double counting, crediting, etc. All the requirements and the criteria are then governed by the principles of relevance, completeness, consistency, accuracy, transparency, and conservativeness. And how projects are adhered to the requirements is that they may apply a methodology there. That's why we are here. So there are a number of pathways in applying a methodology. Like a developer may apply approved methodologies, or comprising mainly of CDM active methodologies, and then ICR methodologies that follow this methodology approval process. Other methodologies by Pro, ICVCM, or CORSIA approved programs that brings the fundamentals of the carbon accounting, and then finally establishment of criteria and procedures within the project documentation. So the ICR methodology approval process, we strongly encourage innovation in this space and want to support IDEA to help them scale into methodologies, as long as they, of course, adhere to the ISO standard, which, like I mentioned, the ISO standard that brings the core, the ICR requirements. They need to be validated by a VVB. They need to undergo public consultation and then subject to ICR review and final approval. So at the methodology level, ISO brings the criteria and procedures at the methodology level rather than at the project level, which the standard is written. So what is a methodology? It's an outline criteria features on how to measure GHG emissions, reduction removals, or enhancement for specific activities or projects. It determines the approach determine the baseline, how it's monitored, how it's reported, are systematically reproducible and verifiable. They include, of course, they are the same structure. It is a scope, applicability, it's a normative references, definitions, and it's the baseline identification, quantification, monitoring. Only documentation governs the process. The documentation. So we see on the left side there we have the requirements that methodology need to adhere to, and the procedures that need to be followed, that support, and templates that are applicable. We have then the ICR methodology requirements that state the requirements for approval, ISO 14642. Then there are terms and conditions for engaging with the ICR, and the procedures that needs to follow the methodology approval process. What supports them, and it's important during the methodology development, is application of predefined terms found in the ICR definitions, and then we have the methodology description template and also the concept note template. About the process, so here we have like two swim lanes. We have the methodology development and a project development. So a methodology approval comprises both of the development of the methodology and a application of that methodology at the project level. So from left to right, it starts with a concept note. This is subject to review by the ICR admin. That brings some guiding guidelines for further methodology development that the methodology development needs to be mindful of during the methodology development. Then it's the validation of the methodology. This methodology has been validated now, and the validation report is available under the public consultation documentation. Then now we are in public consultation. We are gathering comments from the stakeholders that have informed the final version and will inform the final decision on the approval of the methodology, then followed by ICR review and final approval. In parallel to this, it's the application of that methodology, validation of a project, and that follows the project cycle process. The methodology requirements are structured in similar fashion as you would see, and this is throughout all of documentation. It's structured according to the ISO 14642, where we determine the scope, normative references, definitions that are applicable, principles, the carbon principles, to be precise. There are general requirements. Then it's the methodology components that all the methodologies that inform the development, summary descriptions, definitions that are applicable for the methodology, applicability conditions, boundary, baseline scenario, additionality, quantification, and monitoring. Then it's the template. So all the methodologies apply the same template, and that's similar in structure as you would see with other programs. Section 1 on methodologies that, like I mentioned before, that all the methodologies inform the development, summary description of methodology, definition, applicability, condition, boundary, baseline scenario, additionality, and then we come into quantification and addressing some of the core elements, for example, on leakage and permanence issues. You can find the requirements by following these So it will guide you to our documentation page. So we are here to talk about the M-ICR010, Coal Abatement for the Energy Transition public consultation, with this ongoing and closes on the 29th of January, so fast approaching. So we have received now a few comments, and we strongly encourage all stakeholders to participate in this public consultation. So that concludes my overview of the approval process. So I'll turn it back to Björn for a couple of seconds.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gumi. Now, if Duncan and Tumo can unmute us and share your screen, I'll turn it over to you. Here we are.
Okay. Thank you very much for that, Bjorn, and also Gudmundur. I appreciate everything there. Look, thank you and good afternoon from where I am to everybody on this call. Before we begin, I'd like to sincerely thank the International Carbon Registry for convening this public consultation, and Brundtland Consulting, VVB, TÜV Nord, Purdue University, for the rigor, the openness, and professionalism that they have brought to this process. This feedback phase is critical to our collective journey, not only to strengthen this methodology, but to ensure it is robust, credible, and fit for purpose as we move towards real-world implementation. So why are we here? And also, just to be clear from the outset, we are not here because we're against the coal industry. Coal has played, and in many regions continues to play, an important role in economic development, energy security, and industrial growth, particularly in emerging and developing economies. We are here because the global energy system is evolving, and with that evolution comes a need for new financial mechanisms that can support a response and orderly transition. Recent global energy and climate outlooks, including outcomes agreed at COP28, recognize that the world is entering a transition away from fossil fuels as part of a just, orderly, and equitable energy transition. In this context, it is increasingly expected that some existing coal reserves may remain undeveloped over time. However, today there is no scalable, credible methodology that allows coal asset holders to be voluntarily or permanently compensated for keeping economically viable reserves unextracted in a way that is transparent, verifiable, and durable. This absence creates a real challenge. Without an appropriate mechanism, coal assets risk becoming stranded or deferred in ways that deliver no climate benefit, no compensation to asset owners, and no support for affected communities. The methodology we are discussing today is designed to address that gap. At its core, this is a market-based funding mechanism, not a prohibition. It respects property rights, it recognizes coal as an economic asset, provides an alternative pathway for asset holders who voluntarily choose permanent non-extraction, supported by long-term legal, financial, and monitoring safeguards. This approach is particularly relevant, for the Global South. Many developing economies are navigating complex trade-offs between development, energy access, employment, and climate commitments. Traditional climate finance has not yet reached the scale or the speed required to fully support these transitions. So by mobilizing private capital towards verified coal abatements, this mechanism has the potential to unlock new sources of transition finance that supports governments, communities, asset owners, without imposing unfunded mandates, compromising development priorities. Importantly, this is not a standalone climate instrument. Our business model commits to reinvesting at least 30% of project profits into renewable energy and social impact programs that relate to energy security, including clean energy deployments, community infrastructure, skills development in the green economy, and economic diversification. As the model scales and market confidence grows, we fully expect that this reinvestment share can increase over time, further strengthening development and transition outcomes. This links into our vision. It's about accelerating the energy transition. Finally, I want to emphasize that this public consultation is foundational. The feedback we receive here will directly inform how the methodology is refined and strengthened. Getting this right matters to TEG, not just for a single project, but because early implementations will help shape expectations and confidence across this emerging asset class. So with that said, thank you all for being here today. We welcome your feedback. We thank you for it. And I'll hand over now to Dumo from Brundtland Consulting, our partner, who will walk you through the technical architecture of the methodology. Thanks, everyone, and looking forward to the feedback and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. And again, thank you to everyone who's joined the webinar. Just to echo his sentiments, we're very excited to showcase what we've developed so far, but we are treating this as a learning experience in order to strengthen this methodology. So we welcome all feedback, and I will begin. So in terms of just some context behind why we're here and how this informs the methodology is, of course, as we know, coal is the largest source of energy for generating electricity in the world. As of 2021, there were around 8,500 coal power plants in operation, accounting for more than 2,000 gigawatts of capacity and generating over about a third of all electricity. Coal power plants also produce about a fifth of global greenhouse gas emissions, and a lot of the climate instruments that we have today target the demand side emissions, so using electricity from fossil fuel, with not a lot of work being done on the supply side of things, such as a project like ours, which is leaving coal in the ground. Expanding further on this is that under the current rates of demand-side climate mitigation, the world is falling short of its climate ambitions, thus necessitating additional and innovative solutions to address the shortfall. While there's a lot of opportunity on the supply side of things, there are various challenges to a project type like this. Of course, the insufficient incentives, as Duncan has also flagged. But also there are further integrity-related issues that exist, such as non-permanence risk, the potential for overstated mitigation benefits claimed, and tied closely to that, the difficulty in defining a baseline scenario. And so we feel that the carbon market, and more specifically carbon credit projects, can be a viable solution to some of these issues, as it both creates that incentive for more project developers to leave coal in the ground, but also answers to some of those integrity-related issues. And it does that in various ways, but briefly, carbon credit projects can require legal and permanent barriers to ensure that no extraction takes place. Moreover, public or carbon registries require public disclosures of all project-related activity, therefore providing transparency and accountability. Carbon credit projects rely heavily on periodic third-party verification by a validation and verification body over the crediting period, thus providing assurance over issued credits. Moreover, standards require substantial evidence in proving things like a baseline scenario to ensure that all projects that are registered go beyond business as usual scenarios, as well as accounting for additional safeguards such as additionality, which I'll also expand on the next slide. Of course, with all this opportunity that exists both on the supply side as well as the carbon credit potential, we needed a way to kind of formalize this, and that is how the methodology was incepted. It was created in line with the ICVCM's core carbon principles, or CCPs as I'll refer to going forward, to ensure environmental integrity and genuine impact is achieved using this methodology, as well as supporting the mobilization of climate finance for an accelerated just transition. Just a bit of context into the CCPs, there are 3 kind of core principles that are aimed at ensuring that credits that are issued from these projects are regarded as high quality. And these principles include governance, GHG emissions impact, and sustainable development, of course, with sub-bullet points, as you can see on the slide that I'm sharing. And our methodology supports these core principles in the following ways. The methodology allows more projects for coal abatement specifically to then be registered on the ICR, and so supports the principle of governance through the need for public disclosure, and again, that verification by a third party VVB. Moreover, this methodology was prepared in line with relevant ISO standards and ICR requirements to again ensure that reliable, transparent, and high quality projects are being registered with this methodology. Moreover, the methodology answers to some of these key principles associated with any carbon credit project, and it does so in the following ways. The methodology limits additionality to very specific scenarios. It prescribes applicability criteria aimed at ensuring permanence of the avoided emissions. And lastly, it requires robust and expert analysis in determining the baseline and leakage emissions. Largely, the methodology supports sustainable development as it explicitly requires social co-benefits in the criteria to ensure that a net positive effect is achieved via the implementation of the project activity. Moreover, the nature of this project by locking away coal assets positively supports a net zero transition. By blocking away the coal assets. Sorry. Quickly looking at just the summary of the methodology before we get into some deep dives, is it follows the following structure, which is the purpose and scope. And the purpose of this methodology is to, of course, prevent permanent extraction and combustion of thermal coal and related methane for power generation. We then have the baseline and additionality sections, which provide guidelines as to how to adequately and sufficiently prove baseline scenario, as well as demonstrating additionality. There are then some key methodological features, which are permanence, leakage control, and project boundary. And then lastly, we have monitoring and quantification, which all center around robust monitoring to again ensure permanence and compliance, as well as conservative calculation of emissions reductions from avoided coal and methane extraction and combustion emissions. Looking at quite a key principle in terms of ensuring environmental integrity is, of course, additionality. In line with the ICR guidelines, the project developer must demonstrate additionality levels 1 and level 2, and then they have the option of level 3, level 4, or level 5 additionality. However, under this methodology specifically, it only allows for level 3 or common practice additionality, which states that a project can only be additional where the project proponent shows that the project activity or coal abatement is either not common practice within its host country, or that it is a lowly adopted type of project activity within the host country. And we believe the strength of this approach is that it results in a very standardized process of proving additionality, thereby removing the subjectivity that sometimes comes along with additionality, as well as the uncertainty that also comes in. Also, by going the common practice route, that does then also take into consideration some trends that are seen within the host country, as well as any changes in policy, as then it becomes more difficult then to, of course, prove that your project is not common practice. We then look into permanence. We, of course, are not oblivious to the risk of non-permanence that exists within a project such as coal abatement, as coal assets could become extractable should market conditions or even policy change and make coal more favorable. And so our methodology responds to some of this risk in the following ways. Through the applicability criteria by specifically requiring the execution of permanent legal barriers to legally lock away coal assets for a minimum of 100 years. Secondly, through non-tradable ICC contributions or buffer pool contributions, as we refer to in the methodology. And this is a safeguard or insurance against any future extraction. And this is informed by the project's risk assessment. And thirdly, we have extensive reversal guidance. How we define reversals in the methodology is through either extraction of coal on site or through spontaneous combustion. The methodology prescribes some procedures on how to quantify the extent of this, while also provides procedures on how to remediate in the unfortunate event of a reversal occurring. Looking more closely at the applicability criteria, so this methodology applies to projects that permanently prohibit the extraction and combustion of known coal or optionally methane reserves. The methodology is globally applicable and has no restrictions on historical land use. While the methodology has quite a number of applicability criteria that the project developer must tick off in order to register with a project like with the methodology, I've listed some of the most important ones. And the first one being that only thermal coal reserves used for energy generation are eligible. And basically what that means is only coal of a certain grade can be accepted as viable coal that could have been extracted in the baseline. And that's again to strengthen the argument or the assumption around the baseline scenario. Closely connected to that, the project developer must also demonstrate the possibility to obtain mining rights. And again, that's all to further strengthen the argument that extraction and combustion would have occurred in the baseline by showing that it was even possible to begin with. It was possible to mine to begin with, apologies. Thirdly, projects shall execute permanent legal barriers on project area. And this is in direct response to permanence. And what we mean by that is that the barrier should remain in place for a minimum of 100 years and should be legally enforceable on the project area to satisfy this applicability criteria. Lastly, the following projects are not eligible under this methodology, and that includes projects where the project proponent is found to be using the carbon revenue from this methodology to then develop coal elsewhere. Government-owned coal assets and stranded assets, i.e. assets that would not have been able to be sold anyways, that's specifically excluded under this methodology. And lastly, metallurgical coal or any other coal that doesn't meet that threshold of quality that we've defined up front, that's also not applicable under this methodology. Moving on to another key integrity principle, which is around the robust quantification of emissions avoided. We follow this as the main formula. However, there are sub-formulas that kind of all feed into this one big one, but essentially how emissions avoided are calculated is by taking baseline emissions, less any leakage emissions quantified, then reduced by the buffer pool contributions that you need to make, and then less any reversals that occur within that year is how you calculate emissions avoided. Of course, I will expand on these going forward, but just to give you a quick lay of the land, baseline emissions, this is the emissions that are associated with the estimated mass of thermal coal that could have been extracted and combusted in the baseline. And something important to note here is that this mass of coal is determined by an independent expert within the mining field to estimate that for us. We then have leakage emissions, and this is in response to the risk, of course, of market activity shifting, which I'll expand on going forward. This is a leakage discounting factor, if you may, that is modeled, again, by experts and is to be made publicly available to the broader public. We then have these buffer pool contributions, which essentially is a percentage of all declared and verified emissions avoided. The exact percentage differs project by project as it's informed by the project-specific assessed risk. And that's informed by a risk assessment that project developers must do periodically to determine how much of these declared emissions will then be set aside into a buffer pool as a safeguard against the non-permanence risk. We then have reversals, and the important distinction between the buffer pool and the reversals is that reversals is based on actual reversal events occurring. So either coal has been mined within the project area, or there's been some spontaneous combustion of coal that has occurred within the project area. Additionally, to quantifying the extent of this reversal, the methodology prescribes in detail further procedures that the project developer must follow in order to resolve a reversal event. So looking at baseline emissions, which is quite an important feature, of course, of this methodology, it's quantified in the following way, which is the coal mass in the project area in year Y, as determined by the declaration of reserve, which I'll elaborate on just now. That is multiplied by the net calorific value of coal, and that is through direct measurement of the coal within that project area. And then that is further multiplied by an emission factor for the combustion of coal. The methodology allows for 4 options for the emissions factor that is used, but it's all basically premised on the data coming from publicly sourced and reputable sources. Of course, the most critical input to this whole calculation is the coal mass in the project area. We do want to emphasize that it's not the entire coal reserve of the project area. That would be regarded as the coal mass for the purposes of calculating the baseline emissions. But this coal mass is the reasonable amount of coal that could have been extracted and combusted. And this is based on a host of factors, such as what the market is looking like, policy development, operational factors, and the project area's geological assessment. Now, the rationale behind using a declaration of reserve is this usually serves as some sort of mining plan prepared by independent mining experts who usually belong to some sort of industry body, applying industry codes. And they essentially use this to forecast the coal mass that, again, could be reasonably extracted and sold under the assumed market conditions. And we believe in the strength of this because it provides the following safeguards, which is it minimizes the risk of overstated coal assets because, again, this forecast is based on all these factors that I've already mentioned to estimate the sellable production that we pull. It also provides a level of reasonable assurance because, of course, all these experts answer to an independent industry body, and the methods are according to industry codes that are recognized and therefore can be validated by other experts as well as the VVB. And finally, because a lot of assumptions go into a declaration of reserve, these can all and must all be explicitly and transparently stated within the PDD so that it is available to, of course, the VVB, but also the wider public. The project developer also does have the option of quantifying avoided emissions from combusted methane, and it also follows a very similar process as what I've just defined above. We then move on to leakage, and this is in response to the risk of market activity shifting. And basically what that means is where coal extraction takes place at another mine to make up any shortfall that might occur in supply due to the implementation of our project, i.e. locking away some of the coal assets within the project area. And of course, this risk only increases when demand for coal also increases. And I've included a diagrammatical illustration of what that looks like. And so for conservativeness, the methodology does require this to be accounted for against any claimed avoided emissions in the baseline scenario, and it kind of works as a discounting factor. So how it is calculated is you take the baseline emissions that you would have calculated as per the previous section, and you multiply that by a modeled leakage emissions factor for coal. That's also increased with a model uncertainty margin, which is assumed again for conservativeness. The methodology does prescribe specific guidelines for how this modeling needs to take place, needs to be executed rather. And some of the principles include the model must be publicly available, it must be appropriate and in line with the declaration of reserve and be validated by an independent expert. Any parameter that feeds into the model should be sourced from a peer-reviewed and or official data, and again needs to be as conservative as possible. And it should hold for the duration of the crediting period of this project. Lastly, we'll look at reversals, and as I've stated already, a reversal as per the methodology is either where extraction has occurred or where spontaneous combustion has occurred on site. The only real way of measuring the extent of the reversal is through, again, a third-party measurement. So in line with the guidance that we've provided for in section 6, which basically stipulates what is perceived as an expert, an independent expert shall estimate the mass of coal either mined or spontaneously combusted. In a situation where mining was the reversal event, the project developer does also have the option of assuming a default, and this is basically assuming that the maximum mass that could have been extracted in that 1 year, as per the declaration of reserve, that can be assumed as the reversal amount. Once the mass has been determined, it then follows the same calculations as per the baseline emissions that I have also already touched on. And of course, above just quantifying the reversal event, there are procedures that the methodology has put forward above what is required on an ICR level to, of course, remediate the situation and prevent it from ever happening again. So of course, we have the first step, which is assessing the extent of the reversal, which I've just laid out. We then have the application of reversal remedy, or basically the mechanism for compensation for any loss that would have resulted from a reversal. In the methodology, we follow a tiered response, which is when one option isn't sufficient, you then need to move on to the next one until the full loss is fully compensated. And so these tiers include, of course, release from the buffer pool. So all the credits that had been set aside for the buffer pool, those are first used. And if that's not sufficient, then there will be a required deduction from subsequent crediting periods, thereby reducing the amount of emissions that a project developer can claim has been avoided. If that's still not enough, then there needs to be a surrender of previously issued credits from this project once registered. And again, if that's still not enough, then there needs to be a surrender of credits from other eligible programs. And that's such as the VCS, Gold Standard, or even the ICR, where credits would then need to be surrendered from that. And then thirdly, which is also quite an important feature, is that it's the verification and documentation phase, where all calculations, corrective actions, and evidence of surrendered credits will need to be then verified at a VVB level and reported on publicly for transparency before it is also then resolved from an ICR perspective. And it's important to note that no credits can be issued when a reversal event has occurred until it is resolved at an ICR level. Thank you, and I hope that this presentation has helped to clarify some of your questions. Please, of course, feel free to contact Duncan or Brad from the TransEnergy side with any more questions that you might have. But we'll also be happy to share our details from front-end perspective to explain the mechanics behind the methodology specifically. Thank you, and we look forward to your feedback.
Thank you, Tumo and Duncan. So, sticking to the agenda, we're going to take a few questions now, and feel free also to add questions as we go through them. Hopefully, we will be able to answer them. To start this off, Gumi will go through one question, and then we'll take others.
Yeah, just wanted to, this has been a really enjoyable session and really extensive explanation about the approach, the methodological approach. But to be transparent, we have received some comments in the public consultation. So I wanted to start with one question that maybe highlights both they're both supportive and some concerns that have been raised during the consultation. So they have both highlighted both support and concern. On one hand, stakeholders have noted that supply-side coal reduction can be a sound and timely way to reduce global coal demand by raising costs and accelerating substitution toward a cleaner energy sources. On the other hand, concerns have been raised that methodologies based on avoiding fossil fuel extraction may be incompatible with carbon credit, particularly with respect to baseline credibility, additionality, leakage, permanence, and the risk of future exploitation. I understand that you have discussed this issue quite extensively during this session, but how does summarizing, how does the methodology address these integrity concerns in a way that is consistent with the requirements, specifically regard to non-permanence, reversals, and the leakage of the leakage part? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. So why we feel that the methodology can support some of these integrity issues is, of course, we've explained in terms of the baseline scenario. A lot of our applicability criteria was thoughtfully chosen so that it supports the assumption that extraction would have occurred in the baseline. So things like saying it should have been possible, that should get a mining license, for example, and also the fact that we've specifically scoped out a type of coal and not just all coal, because not all of it would be able to be combusted anyways for power generation. So we were very specific in terms of how we were scoping. In terms of additionality, so obviously we have taken a more interesting route and only allowing for one route of additionality to be used. And the reason for that is because, again, we thought that it's a good way to include kind of how the host country is moving as well. So if the country already has some coal phase out already baked into its policies, it will be harder to then prove that your project then is not common practice within that region. And so it would not be additional by that lens. And then, of course, we've echoed many times within the presentation that there are several ways to respond to permanence in line with the ICR and what they have forward, but also applying it to this specific project. So having the buffer pool as an insurance specifically, that's based on the project's risk as well for any reversals like that happening. Of course, ensuring that where reversal has happened, there's a lot of reporting that needs to be done both to the VVB and to the ICR to not only remedy it, but also ensure that it doesn't happen again. And of course, we also have the barriers that are meant to be legally enforced to even make that possibility even smaller. So those are some of the things that we have done. But yeah, happy for anyone on the team to also expand if they so wish.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Tumo.
Yes, thank you. So here's another one from Paul Walton. Why are you limiting the initial methodology to brown and greenfield coal and not operating and profitable mines that make up the majority of thermal coal assets?
Thank you for that.
I'm going to take that one, actually. Thanks, Dumo, but please feel free to support what I have to say here. Paul, thank you for your question, first of all. Look, the current scope should be understood as a phased and pragmatic starting point rather than an exclusion based on materiality. Operating and producing assets are definitely acknowledged as a critical part of the thermal coal landscape, and their treatment will be considered in future iterations once the methodology has been tested, refined, and supported by more consistent operational data. We're taking a staged approach that allows for methodological integrity while providing a clear pathway to more broader coverage over time. What I will also say is, operating mine sites, I prefer not to use the word human capital. We have human beings on site, and human beings have got jobs, so it requires an even further amount of rigor and investment and a legal understanding to ensure that there is a just transition here, and ensuring that nobody is left behind, including those that are on operating mine sites. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you. So here's the next question from Sandeep. How has attribution been considered in the methodology? Coal users shifting to other low carbon energy sources.
So yeah, at the current phase of the methodology, we're only considering the shift of coal from one area to another area. So it hasn't necessarily been accounted for as yet, but that's definitely something that we should think about as well as we kind of close out this iteration of the methodology.
Maybe Sandeep, if you want to leave a public comment during the consultation, it will be valuable to get this perspective into the methodology. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
And then here's another one from Diana Guzman. You mentioned projects from proponents using carbon revenue to develop or mine coal outside of project boundary are not eligible. However, how can you control this?
Yes.
Maybe if I repeat that question, you mentioned projects from proponents that are using carbon revenues to develop or mine coal outside the project boundary are not eligible. However, how can you control this?
So that is something that we definitely can't control, but more just monitor. So looking into the project developers, having the VVB check over maybe any activity from their side that would indicate that maybe some of the revenue is being used. But yeah, definitely something that we do need to probably expand on a bit more, because it is a bit difficult to control that per se.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, actually, just on that point, sorry, Jan Willem, I'll let you go afterwards. Just on that point, because it's an important one, is controlling as much as we can. So, there's the registries and they've got their process and their own rigors and controls in place. There's the VVBs, the auditors. I can't represent or speak on behalf of an auditor here, but no doubt they've got their own KYC processes internally, reviewing organizations with a KYC, KYB, ensuring that key stakeholders, proponents are all being vetted. What's also possible is working with lawyers for any potential organizations that are beneficiaries of credits through royalties, mineral owners, is being able to set out legal agreements to be able to get the mineral owners to ensure that we can legally also get them to sign up that profits are not redistributed into the expansion of fossil fuels. This is certainly an area we're putting time and effort into with our lawyers at present. So a very good question. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. You had something there?
So,
Sorry, no, I think that covered everything then. Thanks very much.
okay. So a follow-up then from Diana. Diana, how can these projects be aligned with the nationally determined contributions of a country under the Paris Agreement, considering only the sources for emissions and removals are counted in a country's national inventory report? Should I read that again, or?
Read the question.
Yeah. So how can these projects be aligned with the national determined contributions of a country under the Paris Agreement, considering only the sources for emissions and removals are counted in a country's national inventory report?
Well, in essence, I heard my sound is not good actually, but in essence, it's emission is not taking place, right? So I would say that's the way you account for it. So it's if they would have taken place, it would have been positively accounted for, right, in the national determined contribution, or in the country's footprint against which it is measured. So yeah, I think that's basically it, right? It's zero emissions.
Yeah. And she Diana followed up with that, are not accounted actually. Just reading the question as is. Okay. Then one here regarding the see here. So how will public consultation comments be handled, and when will responses be published? And what are the next steps in the methodology and approval process following the close of the public consultation? So
That's maybe more for ICR. So like the next steps are to consolidate, like of course this is we closed on the 29th, then we will consolidate all the comments, deliver them to the team that's on the presentation here, along with to the VVB. The team needs to then respond to those comments formally through their process, through the form. How they will address the comments or that like demonstrate their irrelevance, and then it'll be signed off by the VVB. If there's a methodology change, then they will also disclose that again. Then following that update, we will then take the methodology for final review. If there are any like inconsistencies with the ICR program expectations, then we will address them. That will maybe then inform the final version that will then go to the final approval by the board.
Okay. And here's a follow-up from Paul Walton. Regarding labor transition, can your 30% ESG social contribution be applied here? New jobs, retraining, economic development.
Yes, absolutely.
That's quick. Thank you. And then finally, let me see here from Sandeep. Regarding additionality, how is any change in the regulatory setup accounted?
So how does any change in regulatory circumstance, did I understand that correctly?
Yeah. So how is any change in a regulatory setup accounted is the question.
So again, that would need to also feature within how the project developer approves the additionality. So we do have kind of a step-by-step guidance as to how you do that, but how it kind of works practically is that if there is obviously new policy that has come in that encourages coal phase out, for example, that would be accounted for as, you know, a number of projects that are now also leaving coal within the ground. And if you, so basically how it works is that there's a threshold that you essentially need to fall under. So the more projects that do start to then phase out coal as a result of policy changes, that threshold then becomes very hard to meet. So it again is kind of baked in with how you prove it through the steps that you take within the methodology itself. But yeah, definitely could look over that section again to make sure that that's also explicitly stated.
May I, it's a little bit in there, like now under the newest requirement set of the ICR program, there's a reporting obligation by the proponent to report during the monitoring period in the monitoring reports on additionality elements for each process. So this should be captured during the monitoring.
Thank you so much for this presentation.
Okay. Let me see here. So maybe one final question since we're running out of time. Have you taken cognizance of Article 6.4 methodology requirements alignment, such as lock-in emissions, baseline contractions factor, etc.?
No, we have not. We've basically aligned to the ICR requirements, but it is something we can have a look at. Yeah, it is quite strict, right? What Peckham is doing in that sense, also with the baseline adjustments and things like that. There's also a lot of criticism on that, by the way. Yeah, it is something we can discuss and maybe in a way map what the differences are between what they're requiring there and what the ICR requires. But good.
Okay. Thank you. So I think this concludes the webinar. And thank you all for the questions. Also, like Gumi said, to remind of the public consultation, it's through the end of 29th of January this year. Yes, thank you for all the questions and participation. And thank you, Tumo and Duncan.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Bye-bye.
much.
And Jan Willem.
To all participants.
Thanks, guys.
Joining in.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Kijk, kan,